Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough for me right now. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the podcast. And with me today, I have Rohit Bhargava, who is a trend curator, founder of the Non-Obvious company, and the author of 6, no less, best-selling business books, including the Wall Street Journal bestseller Non-Obvious. Hey, Rohit, how are you doing? Oh, and also welcome back, I should say.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It's very nice to be having our conversation again. I was looking forward to it.
Cool. So I'm not going to assume that, I've got many long-time subscribers. I may, but I'm not going to assume that. So, for people that haven't listened to our last interview back, which was back in 2017, which actually, this will be the first time that I'll say this. It was last decade. How cool is that?
Yes, it was.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and also about the work that you do?
Of course, yeah. So I spend most of my time trying to create content to help people be more interesting and be more open-minded. And that's really the point of the book. So I call it non-obvious thinking. And non-obvious thinking to me is seeing the world a little bit differently and coming up with better, different, more unique ideas. And that's what I try and encourage people to do.
Excellent. Now, you've just published a new book called Non-Obvious Megatrends, How to See What Others Miss and Predict the Future. Now, tell us about it. You've done 10 in the series of these things, right? This is like the 10th anniversary. So this is number 10 in the series. Is that right?
Yeah, and just for context, I mean, what that means is back in 2011, I actually did the first version of what I called a trend report.
Right.
And it was just an online publication, and it was, 15 trends that I thought were affecting the world and changing the way we were doing, mainly marketing and social media at that time.
Right.
And it went viral that first year. It had hundreds of thousands of people looking at it. So I said, well, I should probably do it again. And I did it a second time. And it did the same thing.
Cool.
So I figured people must enjoy this stuff. And so I did that for 4 years. And in the 5th year, I had so many people asking me, not only for the trends, but look, how do you do this? How do you start to see these patterns emerge and put these pieces together? And so in the 5th year, I published a full-length book that it also included the techniques for how I do this.
Okay.
And how anyone can do it. And that book hit the bestseller list and really took off. And then every year since then, I published a revised version of the same book with 15 new trends and did it in a book format.
Okay.
So every year since then, there was a new book format.
Awesome. So, but I thought I picked something up which says that, is this the last one of these in the series?
It is, yeah. So, given that it was the last, yeah, it's, the decade is finishing, right? And,
no.
So, for me, it was kind of a nice moment in time to look back over the last decade and all of these past trend predictions. And there's 15 every year times however many years. So well over 100 trends. There's a lot of insight in the past.
Yeah.
And in this new book, Non-Obvious Megatrends, what I do is I put that together to paint a bigger picture of where our world is headed, where our culture is headed.
Right.
And that's really been a more ambitious project for me this time around, but more fulfilling also because of that.
Right. And so if you were to look back on the last kind of like 10 years, I mean, before we get into some of the mega trends and things, I mean, because it's actually, it's kind of nice to do a retrospective in many ways. You talk about, we've got, maybe somewhere in the region of about 150 different trends there. And, you did it just as trends for the first 5 years, and then people start, cumulatively, a lot of people kind of started asking you, like, well, how do you do this? Which sort of implies that you must have been getting a lot of this right. But how well have you done over the course of the last 10 years?
Yeah, a lot of things have been right, and I say that not to be egotistical, because what I try and do with the trend research, and the reason why I call anything a trend is because it's based on an observation of something that's already happening.
Right.
And in fact, my definition of a trend is that it's a curated observation of the accelerating present.
Okay.
And the important part of that to me is the accelerating present. So what I'm really looking for is what's happening somewhere. What are some groups of people doing? And what does that mean in a larger context? And is that going to be more important? Is that going to be more impactful over time?
Okay.
And when you put that sort of lens on it, you're not guessing at what could happen and maybe getting it wrong.
Right.
Instead, you're observing what's happening, and you're extrapolating what could then be the case for the future. And so your hit rate is going to be much higher if you take that approach.
Yeah. So it's not a guess in the dark. There's actually there is evidence that this thing is actually happening, and you're just making an estimation around whether it's got legs and how quickly it will grow, I guess, based on other sort of factors.
Yeah, exactly right.
Okay, so to give people like a flavor of some of these megatrends that you've sort of identified in this cumulative piece of research.
So the first thing that I'll say is, unlike what many other trend reports people may read out there do, I don't categorize the trends by industry or by audience. So right. I don't say these are trends affecting millennials. Right. And I don't say these are trends that are financial industry trends, because every trend that I'm writing about is meant to cross those boundaries. That's why I look for it.
And so what I wanted to do was to almost like dig into it. Well, actually, to explain a couple of them, or two, three of them, because just to give people a flavor of some of the things, and I've picked a few that I think are particularly relevant to this, the whole service and experience domain that I'm particularly interested in, if I may. And the first one I wanted to ask about was this idea of instant knowledge and what that means. Because I had all sorts of images kind of go flashing around in my head when I started to read that one. So, but Rohit, can you tell us a little bit about that and where that's coming from?
Yeah, instant knowledge is really coming from this idea that we generally have a greater expectation that we will be able to figure things out on our own just by the information that's available at our fingertips.
Right.
And in the service context, I think what that means is people are taking more of what might have ordinarily required them to go and contact someone. They're taking more of that upon themselves and expecting to be able to find the solution themselves.
Right.
And if we're going to cater to that new desire, I think that what we will have to be able to do is create the sort of content and materials that enables those people to do that self-service, to help themselves. And that's one of the reasons why I think this idea of content creation, content marketing, and that whole sphere of making useful stuff for people to get smarter has really taken off because of this.
You know, when I read it, it reminded me of, I'm sure you're going to get the reference, of William Gibson and Neuromancer.
Yeah.
And that whole sort of plug-in knowledge bases. So almost like having a USB port, whichever generation it would be, it'd be USB-C right now, I guess, and a port in the back of your neck. So if you wanted to learn a subject, you just plug an encyclopedia in, I guess.
Yeah, and it's what's interesting about a trend like this is it really demonstrates what is true of all of these megatrends, which is that they're not inherently positive or negative. They have upsides and downsides. And so the upside of instant knowledge clearly is, hey, we can learn things and get information much, much faster. The downside is that knowledge isn't the same thing as wisdom. And
No.
we stay on the surface of a lot of things and don't actually dig deeper or become experts, perhaps in the way that we used to in the past. And that leads us down a dangerous path on many levels, right? So I try not to get super philosophical with these megatrends, because I think that at the end of the day, what I'm writing about is a trend that's happening right now, along with advice on how to use it to make your career better, to make your business better, to do something. Right? I believe deeply that trend prediction should be actionable, not trend theater. Yes. But at the same time, I think there are these big implications, and if you do sit down and think about it on that bigger scale, you'll start to realize that there's layers to something like this. And that's also what I want, because when I'm writing a book like this, I really started thinking, what if someone picked up Non-Obvious Megatrends 10 years from now? Yeah. What would they think? Would it still have relevance?
Yeah, so there's some big questions there. I mean, there is the desire, but then there's also kind of like, what does it actually kind of mean as well? Which is fascinating.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So moving on to the next one, that I wanted to ask you about was the other one, which is called human mode. Can you tell me about that one?
The human mode is an observation that in a world where we have more automation and more technology, we will value the human option more and more, and consider it to be luxury, worth paying for, worth retaining, right, and worth investing in as a company, right? And in the UK, actually, there's some great examples of this when you think about what some of the grocery chains are doing, like Tesco having their slow checkout line, and pioneering this idea that, sometimes people might just need to interact with people. Like, we don't always want a kiosk. Yes. Or, if someone has dementia or they have some issues, they need to interact with someone. They can't just deal with the technology all the time. And I think there's a beautiful empathy in that, which is baked into this trend, this idea that we still need and desire human empathy. And that's such a big part of service, obviously, but also just a part of what we crave as humans in interactions.
Yeah, it is fascinating that because I guess we've also kind of like seen it emerge, I guess, around this sort of, would you include sort of the slow movement, which has been emerging over the last kind of few years, as sort of part of this as well?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think that the human side of that, certainly, because a lot of the slow movement, like if you think about slow food, I mean, a lot of it is the preparation of that food and how it's done and who does it, that becomes really important. I think the other part of that is we're frustrated with, I mean, there's a slow movement because we're frustrated with fast.
Yes.
And that does also speak to this.
Yeah, well, I think it's also normalizing kind of like, it's like fast has become the normal. And like, so everything is like, if it's not fast, then it's not good enough. And I think kind of the slow movement is almost a reaction against us, and say that actually things that take time, we've known and we've known that it's over in the past, and over time that things that do take time have value as well. And it's almost like trying to kind of push back against this faster and faster and shorter and and quicker is better sort of idea. And so I quite like that sort of reclaiming the human connection and the time and things, and the flood of technology and faster and easier ways of doing things.
Yeah, and there is this tension between those things, because look, we may love slow food and we may want slow in our life more frequently, but we also don't want to wait in line forever, and we we don't want to we don't want slow when we don't want slow. Yeah. And so I think that there is this tension between those two things, because we don't always want one or the other.
Yes. That's interesting. And also well, we'll leave that there as a hanging question. What does that mean? And so the next thing I wanted to ask you about was that the idea that purposeful profit. I mean, particularly when I think it was in the latter half of last year, we saw, was it the Business Roundtable come up with a big announcement that was signed by all sorts of Fortune 100 and 250 CEOs saying that actually we're going to now pursue a multi-stakeholder model of capitalism rather than just being purely kind of all about total shareholder returns. Is that what's behind this purposeful profit, or is there more going on here? Is it that plus also like a conscious consumerism and so on and so forth? What's the big trend?
Yeah, it's both. I mean, there's two sides really to this trend, and then a third kind of driving element. So the two sides are yes, conscious consumerism and the idea that it matters to our customer, therefore it matters to us. That's one piece. The flip side of that is it matters to our employees. And when you think about what companies people want to work for, and whether they believe in the work that they're doing, and whether they're therefore motivated, whether you can retain your best people. I mean, all of the things that deal with employee engagement.
Right.
This is a big element of that, because if you can keep those amazing people, if you can motivate them to work harder and to believe in the brand, that leads to profit. Everyone knows that, right? I don't need to show you numbers for that. Plenty of companies can already demonstrate that. So those are the two pieces, but I think it also elevates to a bigger idea, which is there are entrepreneurs, there are companies, and there are visions for those groups that are based on purpose first. And we're seeing more of those companies start up. We're seeing more of those groups that have a primary motivation of purpose.
Right.
And that is sort of the larger message, which is, yes, you can bake it into something that's already happening and use it for all of those purposes on the consumer side or the employee side. But there's also these endeavors that are coming out that are world changing, right? World saving. And we need more of those.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And so the final one that I wanted to do, because there's a lot of these trends, what I wanted to ask you about was this idea of flux commerce. And I want you to sort of explain kind of that and what that means. And also particularly because the reason why it particularly jumped out to me is because you talk about the Morioka Shoten bookstore in Ginza in Tokyo, which I know about and I've talked about as almost being this bold and daring approach to selling kind of books, which has made them stand out. And it's almost like completely subverts the idea of what a bookstore is.
Yes.
So I think it's a beautiful example, and I'm glad to see it also quoted in somebody else's kind of work, because I think it's absolutely stand out. But tell us about Flux Commerce.
Yeah, and just for context, I mean that's a bookstore that takes one book and focuses the entire week on selling that one book.
Yeah.
Right. And there's other examples of kind of unique business models, which is one element of this trend. So, for example, you had a theater in Barcelona that put facial tracking screens on the back of every seat to watch people's faces, and it would charge them based on how frequently they laughed at a stand-up comedy show, up to a certain ticket amount of a certain number.
I was going to say, wow.
Yeah, and then they did a new next.
I'm not sure if I'm okay with that.
Well, you'd have to be in order to walk in, right? They didn't do it on secret. It was part of the ticket, right?
Yeah.
So they weren't doing it sneakily, but yeah, you're right. I mean, some people wouldn't.
I'm like going, oh, that feels a little bit.
Yeah, it is. I mean, but it stood out and it got huge media attention, and their seats were filled, and I mean, it worked, right?
Yeah, sure.
But the other side of this trend, which has been really interesting, is this idea that these lines that used to exist between two different industries are increasingly getting blurred. So you have these coffee shops that are also banks. You have Crayola that made crayons, also making makeup. You have furniture stores that are opening hotels. Taco Bell even opened a hotel, right?
Did it?
And
wow.
All of that, it's crazy, right? and what all of these examples are demonstrating is once sacred line between industries where people said this is my vertical or this is your vertical, that doesn't really exist anymore. I mean, Apple launched a credit card, right?
Yep, that's true. I guess it's all about kind of like it's about brands and relationships and kind of where kind of people can naturally go, I guess.
And also just I mean, I think that there is this new model of thinking about innovation that says we need to innovate outside of our industry. And so there's maybe a little more pressure to do that as well.
And so, right, if I think about all of these things and think about all of the other sort of like kind of trends, and I guess my question would be is that, you know, my focus is on organizations that deliver or want to deliver great service or experience. I mean, given that you're immersed in all these kind of trends, I mean, where do you think that organizations should be focusing their attention, if that's where they want to play, as it were? They want to kind of we want to be an organization that's known for a great service and a great experience. I mean, in light of all these trends, where should they be focusing their time and attention?
Well, I'll say the best way to use trends in general, and these trends specifically, is as sparks for new ideas and new initiatives. It can start a fire that then becomes that new thing, whether it's a new product or a new initiative or a new campaign or whatever. So it's not like you need to go down the list and say, okay, let's check off every one of these trends to make sure we're doing something with it. That's not really the intent of these, right? They're not meant to be a checklist. They're meant to be instigators. They're meant to be sparks for that. I think that one of the best ways that an organization could leverage some of this and to use some of this is to ask themselves this question of, rather than putting that label on the product that says made in Italy, right, or made in the UK, or wherever that label says, what would it take to create a new label that said made with empathy? Right. And what would that look like? Because that relates to a number of these trends. It relates to human mode that we talked about. It relates to the instant knowledge, but it's shifting that focus and saying, how do we bake that empathy into what we're doing? Because that demonstrates understanding of people, that demonstrates what people really care about, and that makes it real and authentic and human and all these buzzwords that we want, because people associate with it and they like it.
So the big challenge is kind of like, how do we build? How do organizations build their empathy? Because I guess that's going to be the fuel that's going to help them capitalize and or respond to many of these major trends in large part, I guess.
Yeah, that's right.
So, Ray, anything that any other trends that you think that you'd like to kind of mention? I mean, do you have a favorite?
Yeah, it's hard to pick a favorite per se.
It's like a family, or like it's almost like a set of puppies sort of thing. You're like, I can't really pick a favorite, but you secretly must have a favorite.
Well, it's what's interesting is what I tell people. The first thing I tell people is look, I believe in the validity of all these. Otherwise, I wouldn't have written it. I can tell you that some of them have been more popular than others.
Right.
In terms of what people tend to ask about or tend to want to talk about or learn about.
Okay.
And one of the ones that's been most popular is a trend I call ungendering. And ungendering really has awakened a lot of people's imagination because they see in the media, they see in their daily lives that something's happening in terms of our understanding of gender. And when you look at all of these signs, when you look at the rise of the ungendered option, I mean, there's more than a dozen countries, for example, that offer a third gender option on your passport.
Right.
So now you don't even have to put male or female. You can put gender X and it's that third category. There's more people who send emails, and I get a number of emails now where in the signature file it says underneath somebody's contact details, my preferred pronouns are.
Yes.
And they share what their preferred pronouns are for how they like to be referred. We have social media platforms like Facebook that have expanded their options for gender so far that they have 70 options in a drop-down and a write-in category where you can just write in whatever you like in case one of those 70 plus is not applicable to you.
Wow.
So this is how far,
70, wow. I didn't know it's gone, I didn't know it was 70. I just think, wow, 70. Okay, fine. I
Yeah,
just learned something new.
yeah. And so what I tried to write about is, well, when there's all of this shifting around, what does
Mm,
it mean for our identity and how we see gender and how we see things that were once gendered, but maybe won't be in the future, like toys for children,
sure.
colors, certain colors like the blue for boys and pink for girls, and how the colors became gendered. Like
Mm,
these sorts of things are starting to shift in terms of the understanding of them and what they mean or what they say in the world. And that was really interesting to start exploring and thinking about. And there were a number of trends that kind of built into this. So one year I wrote about what I called fierce femininity.
mm-hmm.
And in another year I wrote about something that I called muddled masculinity, which was all
Sure.
about confusion. And so all of those are part of this trend, because I write about how this is just shifting so quickly. That it's just fascinating to read about.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I mean, particularly, no, I've seen this. I've seen the signs as well, and I'm sort of you know, aware of the, a lot of the things that you mentioned. I just wasn't aware of the 70 different options within a Facebook sort of like control panel, as it were. So that, yeah, that's new. That's new to me. So now that the trends, the non-obvious sort of trends report and the mega trends is it's been around for decades. It's in its 10th edition, or it's the fifth or sixth book or whatever. What next beyond this for you, kind of Rohit?
So the biggest thing is that I'm taking this brand, this non-obvious brand, and
Mm-hmm.
really exploding it to be much bigger.
Okay.
And what it started as was this one book that came out
Mm.
every year that was all about trends, and people started identifying with non-obvious trends. And over time, what I've discovered is that I really want this brand of non-obvious to be a point of view of the world. And the point of view of the world is we need more people who are open-minded. We need more non-obvious thinkers.
Right.
And so to help this brand kind of further that, I wanted to move away from just doing the trend book to also having a number of different things. So we have a guidebook series that we've already launched with 5 books so far from multiple authors who are all part of this guidebook series on
Right.
multiple topics. We've got an annual book awards program that's really gaining traction. We've got a podcast that I'll be starting later this year.
Mm-hmm.
We're probably going to be doing some events like summits and things like that. So there's a lot of different pieces of this non-obvious platform that I
Right.
wanted to explore to really take it further than just this one book.
That's awesome. Well, and good luck with that.
Thank you.
So thank you for all of that. I mean, so what I wanted to do actually, Rohit, before we can like wrap up, I wanted to, because I've been doing this, it's a piece of ongoing kind of research related to a book that I published last year called Punk CX, which is sort of, I explained to you a little bit about before we started talking. And it's a bit like doing a word association game, so a quick fire thing. So if I was to say to you, what sort of word or couple of words would spring to mind if I said to you a punk approach to customer experience? What would you say?
I'd say irreverent, and perhaps throwing out that idea of the customer always being right, and focusing on kindness rather than just bowing down and doing whatever it takes.
Perfect. I think that's. I like that. I don't know if we've had irreverence before, but it's good because we're getting this almost and almost it's like a wisdom of the crowds kind of list of words that describe the different characteristics from a group sense, which is really fun. And I'll share that with kind of everybody kind of like at some point in the near future.
Yep.
The second question is, rather than just words, if I said, what company or brand do you think epitomizes that sort of punk CX approach? As you say, like this irreverence, this kind of like it's about kindness rather than or it's about doing the kind of the opposite of what you might expect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say a brand in terms of using that and putting that out there that I love is Oatly. the oat milk company from Sweden.
Yeah, no, they've just started like a huge advertising campaign here in the UK, which is quite fun.
Yeah, and when what they do, which I really loved, and they had one tactic which I just thought was so clever. Their ads are text heavy.
Yeah,
they're very focused on kind of writing interesting copy.
mm.
And they had a recruiting ad that said you could write ads for us, and it was printed in Poetry magazine.
Right.
And I thought that was just such a clever way to get people interested in oat milk, but B, just have such a targeted message to such a targeted group to say, we're advertising oat milk, but we're doing it by trying to reach people who read Poetry magazine to ask them to write our ads for us. I mean, it's just so clever.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's super cool. I like that a lot. I think my favorite has been there was like a billboard on the side of a bus stop in my local city in Brighton here in the UK, and I think it was it was like this long graphic of an Oatly carton, and then the words it said is like, by the time you said, you will never get the time back that it's taken you to read this advert.
Yep.
That was it. It was like nothing about oat milk at all. It's like you're never going to get. You're like, damn it.
Yeah.
But then
they had another one that I just saw when I landed in New York that said something like, you really have to try hard to stand out by putting an ad on 5,526 iPad screens.
Right.
They have all those iPad screens, and it was just on all the iPad screens.
Yeah, they're having fun with that, which is cool. Which is it's gonna make it stick, which is great. So, Rohit, thank you for that, and thank you for sparing the time for us to talk about the megatrends, the non-obvious megatrends. Congratulations on the last 10 years of effort to pull it together, and absolutely all the very, very best of luck on kind of the future endeavors around to where you're going to take the non-obvious kind of trends. I mean, because thanks very much for your time today. That's been great.
Thank you so much.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing people, and it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as we say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.